as the UK Parliament inches closer to Tuesday's Brexit vote, all eyes track north of Westminster to Yorkshire, where opposition leader Jeremy Corbyn announced what he plans to do in the event that Theresa May's deal is struck down. Our UK correspondent Vincent McAviney was at that press conference in Yorkshire. Vincent, what exactly is Jeremy Corbyn, the Labour leader, calling for?
Good evening, Tessa. Well, Jeremy Corbyn swapped Westminster, where that debate is still going on the Brexit deal, for Wakefield today when he came here to give a speech calling on the Prime Minister to call a general election. He said that she should put her deal to the voters, and that if Labour won, he would be able to strike a better deal with the European Union that would have frictionless trade into the single market. So some big claims there. Now, she is not going to do that. So Jeremy Corbyn is looking at all of the scenarios which might play out next week. The Prime Minister is still expected to lose the vote on her withdrawal agreement on Tuesday night. And then he says that all options would be on the table, but one in particular he will be going after: a vote of no confidence in the government. Here's what he had to say.
Labour will table a motion of no confidence in the government at the moment we judge it to have the best chance of success. Clearly, Labour does not have enough MPs at the moment in Parliament to win a confidence vote on its own. So members across the House should vote with us to break the deadlock. This paralysis cannot continue. Uncertainty is putting people's jobs and livelihoods at risk. And if a general election cannot be secured, and we'll try, then we'll keep all options on the table, including the option of campaigning for a public vote. But an election must be and is the priority.
Now, two important things to note about that section of his speech. The first is on the vote of no confidence. He admitted he doesn't have the votes in the Commons with his own party and the opposition parties to get it over the line and trigger a general election by toppling Theresa May. He would have to get some of the Conservative MPs who have been rebelling this week to defeat the government on board with that. Whether or not they would go as far as to topple their own government, well, it's unclear. And on that last part where he mentioned a second referendum, this is something that within the polling of his own party, many of them want to have a second referendum or a people's vote. It's something that his Brexit secretary, Sir Keir Starmer, has been keen on. He forced it onto the party's platform at their conference, but Jeremy Corbyn himself still not that warm to the idea. He would rather try and seize power, and he did, when he was challenged on whether or not he'd have to pause Article 50, sort of admit that he would have to revoke it in order for more negotiation time with the EU.
All right, thank you for that. Our correspondent Vincent McAviney reporting there. All right, joining me to discuss this, our political editor at Euronews, Darren McCaffrey. We have Politico's reporter Maya Delabom and Nina Gill, British Labour MEP with the Socialists and Democrats group. All right, I'll start with you, Nina. You're with Labour. Do you agree with what Jeremy Corbyn wants to happen?
Well, clearly that's been a Labour Party policy strategy for some months, that we want to have a general election because there are a lot of issues that do need to be addressed. But we're not ruling out any of the options. And clearly, if we cannot get a general election, as your reporter rightly said, that basically we don't have the majority to get a vote of no confidence. If we don't get that, clearly a public vote is something we would consider. And I would say that, you know, Labour essentially is a pro-EU party and want to make sure that we stay as closely aligned to the European Union.
Is it clear, so Jeremy Corbyn would campaign to remain in that referendum, would he?
I believe...
I asked him last month in Lisbon, and he wouldn't say how he would campaign.
Well, he has said he would campaign to remain. He has campaigned...
He said he would campaign for a people's vote, but when asked how he would campaign in that referendum, he's not been terribly clear.
Well, I believe, you know, he has been very engaged with the European family, much more engaged than many other previous leaders, you know, in being at all the socialist family events. And I think, you know, essentially, he sees us in many ways to remain as close to the European Union as we can.
Right. If we
so
can read
I think he will campaign to remain.
Well, if we read between
right?
the lines then, Darren, what do you think? What is the end game for Jeremy Corbyn? What does he want out of this?
Well, the problem for Labour is quite difficult, and it is why this has been a divisive issue as much for Labour almost as it has been for the Conservative Party, not least of all because at the last election, Labour stood on a manifesto in which they said that they would leave the European Union, they would fulfil the result of the referendum.
But that was fulfil the result of the referendum.
Yes, that was what, in June of 2017, and that they would leave the single market and the customs union. They campaigned on that manifesto. Labour did surprisingly well in that election. But the top 10 Labour constituencies, top 10 Remain constituencies are Labour in the UK, and the top 10 Leave constituencies in the UK are also Labour. And there is a big divide between the party membership, many of whom want a second referendum, and many Labour voters, particularly where Jeremy Corbyn was today in Wakefield and across the north of England, who want to leave. So Jeremy Corbyn's having to play a very, very, very difficult political game here. Labour are as divided on this issue, its voters and its members as the Conservative Party are.
A quick comment from you, Maya, before we move on to a piece actually that you had written. So, what do you read into Corbyn's move today?
I think in the EU, because I work in the EU, there's a lot of miscomprehension, and we don't always understand exactly what Jeremy Corbyn stands for and where his pro-Europeanness is.
Hence the question of where he would stand. Yeah.
Yes, that's the feeling we have here in the Parliament.
OK, last word on this.
I was just going to say, I think Jeremy is an internationalist at the end. You know, he believes that we work with Europe. He's not anti-European as such. He has issues with certain elements of, let's say, EU legislation, but he's not anti-EU.
But he's not always very clear. It's not always very clear. I think for people who don't live in the UK or for Europeans in general, it's not.
Yeah. He thinks to a degree that the European Union is a capitalist club that stops government from giving state aid to particular industries. Clearly, what Jeremy Corbyn would like to do with the UK, which is nationalise entire industries and invest government money in, would contravene EU rules. Hence why he's not the biggest fan of the European Union.